Here are some random Zelda facts. It was originally intended for Link to be collecting computer chips instead of the Triforce pieces in the first game. This is because there was supposed to be a time travel element of sorts into both the past and future. The main character was the link between the three time periods, so they called him Link. The early futuristic concept for the Triforce, however, was abandoned and replaced by a heroic fantasy instead. In Ocarina of Time, if Link holds a Deku stick near a butterfly and then walks away slowly, the butterfly will actually follow the Deku stick away and will then transform into a fairy. There's no real reason given for this, but a popular theory is that this references Super Mario 64, in which butterflies turn into 1-up mushrooms, or occasionally explosive bombs when Mario punches or kicks at a swarm of butterflies. It was actually meant to be a third Oracle game. The games were originally meant to focus on each piece of the Triforce. One game would focus on action, which would be equal to power, having you fight more. Another focusing on puzzle solving, which would equal wisdom. The gameplay of the Courage chapter, however, was never released. Each game was to have a theme. Power would focus on the seasons and interchanging between them. Wisdom was to focus on time and moving between night and day, while Courage would use the theme of color. Finally, each was to have an oracle, which the game's story was meant to focus around. The characters were named after the goddesses of Hyrule: Din for power, Nehru for wisdom, and Pharaoh for courage. However, in the year 2000, it was realized that the 3 games were probably too much for the limitations of the handheld and the password system used within the games. So the developers cut back to just 2 games and changed their storylines a bit to Oracle of Ages and Seasons, while the third one was eliminated. Ocarina of Time went through an unusually lengthy and winding development process. At one point, it was going to be very similar to Super Mario 64, and it actually shares an engine with that game, albeit heavily modified. And at another point, it was going to be exclusive to the 64DD peripheral. But one of the most surprising revelations to come out about the game over the years is that Miyamoto originally wanted the game to be played entirely in first person, so that gamers would get a better feel for the world that was being built. The idea was ultimately discarded, however, when young Link was introduced into the storyline. After all, it didn't make sense to not let players see the character age throughout the course of the adventure. However, the first-person perspective did make it into the game in a more limited fashion, and Miyamoto eventually pushed for the first-person idea to be incorporated into Metroid Prime. Though the Nintendo 64 sold well, the company still invested a lot of its hopes and money into an add-on for the console, the 64DD. Development of the pre-Hibernal stalled, however, and so most of the planned games were cancelled or just moved to the N64 or GameCube. The 64DD was eventually only released in Japan in late 1999 in very limited quantities. Still, a lot of work went into these 64DD titles, with Zelda being among the most famous. It's not entirely clear what Zelda would have looked like, though interviews from the time indicated it would have added dungeons and enemies to the regular Ocarina of Time game. Eventually, Ocarina of Time Master Quest, a more difficult remix version of the original game, was released for the GameCube and the 3DS as well. Nintendo claims that this version of the game is the fabled Zelda, though some fans still insist that the real Zelda has never been released. So Twilight Princess launched on the Wii and GameCube around the same time. It was developed with the GameCube in mind, however, so when they moved it over to the Wii, some changes had to be made for it to work on the console, like adding motion controls. But because Link is left-handed in the game, they had to actually mirror the world entirely, because Nintendo wanted Twilight Princess's motion controls to be suited to right-handed people who they recognized were the majority of players. However, Twilight Princess HD on the Wii U actually returned the original perspective of the game. Not only that, but in hero mode, they made it so it would be mirrored, just like the Wii version. The original Legend of Zelda for the NES opening theme was originally just a pre-existing song called Ravel's Ballrio. However, even though Ballrio was an older piece of music, it still fell within copyrighted law at the time. Right as the game was nearly finished, Miyamoto and composer Koji Kondo realized they couldn't use Ravel's song. So, in a last-minute burst of effort, Kondo simply composed a new opening song based on the music he'd written for the game. He accomplished this overnight. Considering what a classic piece of video game music Zelda's opening theme now is, this is quite the miracle. Once upon a time, Retro Studios, one of Nintendo's developers, pitched and prototyped a Sheikah RPG spin-off game in the mid-2000s. It's unsure why the project was ultimately cut, as the concept sounded fairly intriguing, especially for Zelda fans. The intended game would have followed the last of the Sheikah and revealed how the Master Sword came to be. Interestingly, the plot of the Master Sword's origins was recycled in Skyward Sword, though it's unclear if the cut spin-off story was intentionally reused or not. You might have noticed that Link and Disney's Peter Pan share a couple of similar characteristics, including their green color schemes and pointed elf-like ears. This isn't a coincidence. In a 2012 interview with Game Cult, Shigeru Miyamoto said that when they began designing Link, the pointed ears reminded them of Peter Pan, so they started to take inspiration from it. Of course, Link's appearance wasn't a direct replica of Peter Pan. However, Miyamoto said that Peter Pan's green suited Link perfectly, due to it complementing the various forest environments in the original game. The idea clearly stuck, as Link's appearance has remained mostly consistent throughout the series. Mark Frost and David Lynch's 1990 TV show Twin Peaks is characterized by its eccentric characters and the mystery plaguing a small town. In Volume 2 of Iwata asked, Tezuka Tasi, the director of Link's Awakening, said that when making the game, he wanted it to have a feel that's somewhat like Twin Peaks. Tezuka said that to achieve this, the game would focus on a small group of characters in a small town, in this case the island of Koholin. According to Olji Aonuma, in the same interview, Tezuka suggested to make all the characters suspicious types like in the then popular Twin Peaks. The idea would then be carried on into later Zelda titles such as Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which also have their fair share of suspicious characters. The sound made by Choo-Choos in Zelda The Wind Waker is actually a reverse sped up version of an argument between two Japanese men. Phrases like "at least I'm not balding" and "looking like you are, people will think you're a monster" can be heard in Japanese in the original audio. The Zelda series and Princess Zelda herself are actually named after Alabama novelist Zelda Fitzgerald. Miyamoto thought that she was a famous and beautiful woman from all accounts and liked the sound of her name, so he took the liberty of using her name for the very first Zelda title and the character as we know them today. Collecting stray fairies was one of the biggest challenges in Majora's Mask, but the Great Fairies always rewarded you for your trouble. However, in early builds of the game, you were also rewarded with a hilarious cutscene as well. You see, the Great Fairy would bring Link to her magic dojo, where she would teach him a new move or put him through a training montage to build up his defense, instead of just giving it to you magically in the game now. Parts of the idea were used in Twilight Princess when the hero Sei taught you new moves, though he's far more stoic about the process than the Great Fairy was. In Ocarina of Time, a soldier appears at only one brief point in the game, in the back alley of Hyrule Town. After Link obtains the 3 spiritual stones, and just before he enters the Temple of Time. It's an incredibly brief and incredibly specific window of time that you can easily overlook. But when Link speaks with the soldier, he tells Link of Ganondorf's betrayal of the royal family. Tried to speak with him again though, and Navi only solemnly states he's not moving anymore. Despite how easy it is to miss, this is actually one of the most powerful and narratively important moments in the entire game. There's actually some mystery as to why this scene even exists though, in this way in the first place, with some speculating that it might be a leftover from an abandoned idea. Despite bearing the name Legend of Zelda, Princess Zelda herself doesn't even appear in every game. She's not in Link's Awakening or in Triforce Heroes, though both games do contain a small reference to her. She's also not involved in Majora's Mask, appearing only in a flashback of Ocarina of Time. Even though Zelda doesn't appear in every game, she does play a significant role in the series as a whole. She is by far Nintendo's most involved princess and one of its strongest female characters. While Tingle is one of the most frightening characters in the Legend of Zelda series, he actually did manage to land a series of spin-off games for the Nintendo DS. While the first one, called Freshly Picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, was launched in both Japan and Eastern Europe, the others only came out in Japan. One is a remake of Balloon Fight for the NES, only with Tingle, called Tingle's Balloon Fight. Another was a DSiWare app which featured a calculator, fortune teller, and a dancing little Tingle called Too Much Tingle Pack. And the other is a sequel to the first Tingle game called Reppled Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love. These strange spin-off games are not considered canon. Christianity was the original intended religion of the Legend of Zelda series before the creation of the Golden Goddess. Its existence is very vague, but implied throughout the early installments of the series. The references to the Christian religion are subtle, contained largely to the cross symbol that appears in the first Legend of Zelda game and Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. While A Link to the Past does introduce the lore of the goddess and Hyrule's invented religion, the game also has a few holdover Christian references too, such as official artwork of Link kneeling to a crucifix. The original Legend of Zelda for the NES famously opens with Link entering a cave and an unnamed old man offering him a sword, telling him it's dangerous to go alone, take this. That's how the adventure usually begins for most players, at least, but it turns out you can actually beat most of the entire game without ever picking up the sword. Of course, that's no easy feat. To do this, simply ignore the old man and start playing through the game as normal. You have to evade enemies for a bit as you pick up the blue candle, then bombs, then arrows, and lastly the boomerang to get through the game's dungeons without the sword. You will need a sword, however, to defeat the game's final boss, Ganon, but that's strangely the only time it's an absolute requirement. Those of you who played Ocarina of Time are probably familiar with the ending sequence, which showcases all the wonderful people that Link saved. Most of the characters we see are in full view, but many of the shopkeepers featured are leaning on boxes or in frame above the waist. These prop-assisted shenanigans are actually pretty intelligent from a design and development standpoint. Only half of a character's body is shown, which cuts down on 3D rendering times. In fact, Nintendo went as far as to cut the legs off of these poor people. If you use a cheating device to swirl the camera around behind a shop's counter, you'll notice the NPC has no bottom half. Despite initial criticism for its art style, The Wind Waker is now widely considered a masterpiece, with many Zelda fans citing it as their favorite in the series. But even most of them would concede that the Triforce Quest, a tedious exercise in sailing the Great Sea for Triforce shards in the game's final hours, could have at least been better implemented. As it turns out, there was a time where the quest was better implemented. Since the game was released, Wind Waker director Eiji Aonuma has admitted that the original idea was to have two dungeons essentially take the place of the Triforce quest, but they had to be cut for time. He also said parts of those dungeons were later used in other Zelda games, but where exactly they ended up remains unknown. When Nintendo announced the GameCube in 2000, one of the accompanying demos shown off was a 30-second clip of an epic sword fight between Link and Ganondorf. It's actually a really cool cinematic clip that still holds up after more than 20 years. Gamers loved it and couldn't wait to see more of this mature, realistic Zelda, but when Nintendo ultimately went in a wildly different art direction for the next Zelda title, some fans were confused and even angry. What you might not know is that Nintendo started development of a game that was visually closer to that Space World demo and based more on Ocarina of Time's looks. However, they found they didn't really have any new ideas to go along with it, but when one decided to do a cartoonish sketch of Link, the rest of the team loved it so much that they used that as the basis for the next game's art style. And that's how we ended up with the Wind Waker instead of a game that looked more like that demo. The 5 main areas in Majora's Mask appear to mirror the 5 stages of grief. Clocktown is denial. Its residents continue their daily lives, refusing to believe the moon will fall. Woodfall is anger. The Deku King is trying to kill a young monkey who allegedly kidnapped his daughter. Snowhead is bargaining. Doraemon begs Link to bring him back to life. Great Bay is the present. Miku dies trying to save the eggs of his love interest, Lulu, leaving her alone. Akana Valley is acceptance. The only thing Link has left to conquer is himself. facing his own grief at the loss of his friend, the friend who began the journey with him, Navi. In Link's Awakening, if you sprinkle magic powder on Buzz Blobs, they'll transform into Cluckmen and say, "Hey Mon, you know me, I like sword names the best. It can display millions of polygons. I definitely need it as fast as possible," referencing the still in development Nintendo 64, then called Ultra 64, a short name that can display millions of polygons. In A Link to the Past, you are supposed to return Agahim's magic attacks with the Master Sword. However, it's also possible with the bug-catching net. The item is not only non-magical but causes no damage to enemies. Either the coders left it in as a joke or it was overlooked in development. Link's design in Ocarina of Time was actually changed quite a bit after a developer's wife said all of Nintendo's characters have funny noses. Don't you have any handsome ones? Link was thus given a defined nose and pierced ears, making him look sort of cool. It was said this new Link wouldn't fit Nintendo style if he wore too cool, and that is why he wears long underwear. Most of the blood in the original release of Ocarina of Time was changed from red to green in later re-releases so that the game could keep its E rating. This is most noticeable as Ganondorf vomits when you beat him, and the blood from when Link finishes off Ganon with the Master Sword at the end of the game. After slashing a sign with your sword in Ocarina of Time, playing Zelda's lullaby near the sign will actually repair it. Once the song is finished, the solving a puzzle jingle plays and the sign magically repairs itself. Super Mario World's Forest of Illusion and Legend of Zelda's Lost Woods actually share the same name in the Japanese versions of those games. Maori no Mori, Lost Forest in English. All the standard exits in the Forest of Illusion send you around in circles, which is comparable to the Lost Woods, circling you back to the entrance after a wrong turn. Twilight Princess was originally going to be a direct sequel to The Wind Waker, and was said to use a similar art style. However, sales of The Wind Waker were sluggish, and it was thought this was because of its cartoon appearance. Concerned that the sequel would have the same problem, Nintendo made a more realistic looking Zelda game, based on that Space World 2000 demo. The name Majora in Zelda Majora's Mask comes from an ancient Brazilian tribe society of a similar name, called the Marajora, which made masks and other decorations in a style which looks strikingly similar to Majora's Mask. There is actually an enemy Artwing from Star Fox hidden in Ocarina of Time's code. It can only be accessed with GameStar codes and is thought to be a cameo made by the game designers for their own amusement. It's speculated that the forest and water temples in Ocarina of Time were originally wind and ice temples. The symbol of the water medallion from the water temple appears to have a snowflake design on it, and the forest medallion design resembles a fan. This connection is further supported by the interior of Ganon's tower, which is based on different temples. The forest temple portion of the tower has a wind puzzle based around fans, and the water temple portion of the tower is based on ice. It is possible that Poes from the Legend of Zelda series are named after Edgar Allan Poe, a famous American poet and writer of short stories. Many of Poe's short stories contain instances of paranormal phenomenon, some of which involve ghosts. This is even more likely true because in Oracle of Ages, there is a Poe named Alan you interact with, leading more credence to the theory. Alternatively, Poe may derive from the Chinese philosophy of Hun and Po, similar to yin and yang, with the Hun being part of the soul that strives for heaven and is associated with life, and Po being the part of the soul that stays with the corpse and is associated with death. In Majora's Mask, there are actually 3 strange unused Link masks that can be found within the game's data. Code in the game suggests that they were meant to be worn by Skull Kid, but were cut later on in development. The remake of Ocarina of Time on the 3DS actually has many of the same bugs as the N64 version. According to Nintendo, these bugs were left in the remake so players had the same experiences no matter where they played the game. In Ocarina of Time, the twins' house in Kokori Forest actually has 2 pots, but the game background only shows 1. While technically invisible in-game, Link can still roll in between the 2 pots, which will result in parts of Link disappearing behind where the second pot should be. In the NES Legend of Zelda instruction manual, it states that a Pulse voice hates loud noise. Consequently, many players mistakenly believe this to be a reference to the game's recorder item, and were surprised to find that the instrument had no effect on the creatures. The text actually only applies to the Japanese version of the game, as the Famicom controller did have a built-in microphone, and by talking into it you can effectively kill the pulse with your voice. It was previously said that Okoko the Oka got her name from the color value of Link's tunic in the first Zelda game. It turns out that this was misinformation. The value is actually from Ocarina of Time, Link's concept art. Twilight Princess was influenced by Ocarina of Time in many ways, so this tribute makes sense. The exact value can be found in the art. It was likely a base for the whole tunic. In Ocarina of Time, you can actually deflect Phantom Ganon's magic with a bottle. This quirk was also referenced in The Wind Waker, where you can also deflect Phantom Ganon's magic with the same bottle. In Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, every palace actually has unique graphics for windows, but the 4th Maze Palace and 6 Hidden Palaces don't actually have any windows, rendering their window graphics ordinarily unused. It is still possible, however, to see them through a glitch involving the fairy spell, which makes the game load Pararapa Palace's layout with the graphics of another palace. In A Link to the Past, the Japanese title screen has neither the sword nor the castle background seen in the English title screens. The European title screen replaced the copyright R trademark with an A trademark. And in the Japanese and European versions, you can go straight to the file select by pressing start. In the US version, this option is only offered to you after using save and quit if you start the game normally. You have to wait until the title screen actually displays the title before you can go into the file select. Breath of the Wild's game icon displayed on the Switch's home screen is actually different depending on the system region set in the console settings. While the Japanese and North America icon are similar, the European/Australian version is entirely different. Curiously, although the European box art matches its home menu icon, the Australian box art uses the North American/Japanese box art instead. A link between worlds is referred to internally as Jack. The reason for this becomes apparent when looking at the internal names of other Zelda games released in the same time frame. Ocarina of Time 3D is known as Queen, The Wind Waker HD is known as King, and Majora's Mask 3D is known as Joker, while Triforce Heroes is known as Alice. The last moniker might seem out of place until you remember the playing card elements in the classic tale of Alice in Wonderland, which this seems to be a reference to. The Midas Cap is the only Game Boy Advance game with 2 different not-for-resale cartridges, which were used in store kiosks. One says not for resale and contains the full version of the game, while the other one says not for resale demo, where there are 3 playable areas to explore, in the game only. Subsequent Zelda games like Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks on the DS also had demo cards with selectable stages, instead of being the full game. Skyward Sword is the second game in the Zelda series that requires an external accessory, the Wii Motion Plus, to be played. The first being Majora's Mask on the N64, which required the expansion pack to be played. The 7th dungeon of Twilight Princess, City in the Sky, is speculated to be based on a painting called Another World by M.C. Escher. The creatures in the paintings resemble okas and are seen standing on walls. In Twilight Princess, the oka are found running on the walls and floor in the dungeon as well. In Link's Awakening, if the player makes their character name Zelda, they are treated to a salsa remix of the game's main theme. This could be a nod to the original Zelda on NES, where entering the name Zelda on the second save slot results in the game starting on the second quest immediately. It is important to note, however, that Zelda must be in all capitals for this to work. On the Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker maps, Gerudo Fortress lines up with the Forsaken Fortress, Death Mountain lines up with Dragon Roost Mountain, and the locations of both Deku trees also line up quite well. It seems as though they are the exact same places at different points in time. Hyrule Historia, a book released to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Zelda series, explains that Fi actually has arms underneath her winged gown, but they do not appear as there are no need for them in-game. The many incarnations of Ganon are composed of a mere 3 individuals. One appears only in Four Swords Adventures, a second appears both as himself and through his malice-based apparitions in Breath of the Wild, Age of Calamity, and Tears of the Kingdom. And every other appearance is the same Ganon who first aroused during Ocarina of Time. In Girahim's first 2 forms, his right ear is pointed, whereas his left ear is round. However, in his final form, both ears are pointed. It is likely that the designer shortened his ear in the first forms to make animating his hair easier for the game. In Cadence of Hyrule, by playing the game cooperatively with both Zelda and Impa, Impa will still appear in Zelda's quarters, even though one of the players is already playing as her. However, no unique dialogue occurs when speaking to Impa as Impa. Talon, along with Ingo, seem to be based on Mario and Luigi of the Super Mario Bros. Series. In an Oracle of Seasons art book, Talon's hat even has Mario's M logo on it. Additionally, there is a Bowser emblem on Talon's scarf, which is also present on Malon. Talon's sleeping pose in Ocarina of Time is also identical to Mario's sleeping pose from Super Mario 64. Another connection is that in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, Talon's character design is used for the original character of Mario and Luigi's father. In Twilight Princess, when Link is in his wolf form but does not have Midna riding on his back, her shadow still appears over him. And if Link is in front of anything reflective, such as the ice from Snow Peak Ruins, Midna will have no reflection. In Tears of the Kingdom, Link can find a journal talking about the Yiga clan's plans to reverse engineer the Thunder Helm to create the Lightning Helm. In this journal, it is revealed that Riju is actually the young chief's last name and that her first name is Mekala. It was previously assumed that Riju was her first and only name, similar to Link. This makes Riju the only modern sage or companion to have a full name. Aster was seemingly planned to be a playable character at one point in development for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, as some characters possess a voice line of dialogue that goes unused, calling Aster's name, used when switching characters during gameplay. It is currently unknown why he was scrapped, however. While wearing the Va Ruda Divine Helm in Tears of the Kingdom, after awakening Sidon as a sage, Sidon himself will wear a Zonite helm identical to the one the ancient sage wore during the Imprisoning War. This will grant Sidon's avatar an attack boost. However, this does not affect his abilities, cooldown time, or water attack. The helm also grants Link a level 1 swim boost. Darunia is the only character in the original Hyrule Warriors game to have his own theme song played on his victory sequence. The theme is a remixed version of Saria's song, with him dancing in the same way as in Ocarina of Time. During Sans boss fight in Twilight Princess, the music changes slightly to match the arenas he warps through. The music includes fragments of the themes from the original boss battles of the respective arenas. Miyamoto's original idea for Link's crossbow training was to be a Terminator-style story where Link was warped into the future. This way, Link could use guns without it seeming out of place. This idea was immediately vetoed by the rest of the development team, however, and so Link was given a rapid-fire crossbow instead. It is possible that the Yiga foot soldiers in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were inspired by the Ache enemies from the Adventure of Link, since they both disguised themselves as travelers or townspeople before attacking when approached by Link. Hacking into the Majora's Mask 3D files reveals that the face models used for the Moon Children in the game is that of the Happy Mask salesman. In the N64 original version of the game, their faces had no texture to them. Despite being a Wii game, Skyward Sword only runs in 16:9 widescreen mode, even with the full screen setting for the Wii on. In the events that the Wii's default full screen mode is on while playing the game, the image is displayed in a letterbox format so as to not inconvenience those without widescreen televisions. Most of Link's Super Smash Bros. Moveset was used for his appearance as a playable fighter in Soul Calibur 2. Many attacks even share the same name as the names provided for Link's standard moveset on the Super Smash Bros. Website. Groos's theme in Skyward Sword bears resemblance to the theme played near Tetra's Pirate Crew in Wind Waker. Furthermore, the Groosinator can be compared to the catapult on Tetra's ship, both of which are used to launch Link to access certain areas in the games. There's actually quite a few Mario references in A Link to the Past, such as the portraits on the walls inside many houses in Kakariko Village, which occasionally dispense rupees when pulled by Link, appears to be Mario. The theme that plays when soldiers chase Link in the village is actually a remix of the Super Mario Bros. 2 boss theme, and the 7th Dark World dungeon, Turtle Rock, contains Chain Chomps, an enemy for the Mario series. Phantom Hourglass is the first game in the Zelda series that does not include any new tools. All of the items in the game have been featured in previous Zelda games. The large formations of blue rupees found in hidden caves and rooms in A Link to the Past have a smaller hitbox than rupees found from killing enemies and lifting jars or skulls. This is because these rupees are not sprites, but rather object layer tiles, as the game cannot handle many sprites on screen. As a result, Link cannot pick these rupees up with items like the hook shot or the boomerang, as they will simply go right through them. Link can even walk in between the rupees if they are very close to another. Green rupees found in the color dungeon of Link's Awakening DX also behave similarly. Contrary to popular belief, the Navi Trackers mode in Four Swords Adventures was in fact released outside of Japan, but only in South Korea. This is because the Korean version was a repackaging of the Japanese version, with only the region coding changed, the outer box art, and a card explaining the controls translated. A picture of a harp similar to the goddess's harp from Skyward Sword can actually be found in the milk bar in A Link Between Worlds. The harp's pairing with a picture of a violin seems to make it more of a reference to Melody's harp from the Wind Waker, however, as the violin seems to reference Makar's violin. There is an error in the Great Fairy's names in the North American release of Majora's Mask on the N64. The Great Fairy found by Snowhead Temple introduces herself as the Great Fairy of Wisdom, and then the Great Fairy of Courage on subsequent visits. Likewise, the Great Fairy near the Great Bay Coast says he is the Great Fairy of Courage and then the Great Fairy of Wisdom. This is not present in the Japanese and European releases, in which Snowhead's Great Fairy is the Great Fairy of Wisdom and Great Bay's Great Fairy is the Great Fairy of Courage. This was later fixed, however, in the 3DS remake of the game. At first glance, the strange names of Skyloft citizens and Skyward Sword appear to either be references to past games, Link, Zelda, Garpora, Beetle, for example, or simple inventions. A closer look reveals that most of the Skyloft's villagers are named after birds or other flying animals. Qualin's name references a crow's call, while Stritz is a shortening of the word ostrich. Oriel and Paro refer to Orioles and Sparrows respectively. Henna and Rostra are stylizations of hen and rooster. Peter's name and cocky attitude refer to a peacock. Even Batrio's name and design are inspired by bats. There are plenty more bird references throughout Skyloft as well. An ice cream meal item exists in Breath of the Wild, which is used in place of any elixirs with corrupted/non-existent effects. It's possible to get this by accident via the inventory slot transfer transfer glitch, but the weapon modifier corruption glitch lets you get it consistently. This item appears to not exist in Tears of the Kingdom, however. In the demo version of Breath of the Wild, used at E3 2016, the Sheikah Slate featured a health sensor that was built into the first-person scope ability. When pointed at an enemy, for 1 second it revealed their number of hit points. Although it was later removed in the final version of the game, a similar ability was added to the champion's tunic in the final release. In Skyward Sword, Karang has animations for when she's being blown by the gust bellows. You can't use items indoors, however, and she's only outdoors before you obtain the item, making this animation impossible to see in-game without cheating. The horn statue in Tears of the Kingdom has unused text if first encountered without having obtained a heart container or stamina vessel. Yet this is impossible because obtaining a heart container is actually required to open a door in the Temple of Time at the Great Sky Island, which is before the horn statue can be encountered. Although non-canon, Zelda the Wand of Gamelon is the first game in which Impa appears in-game. Previously, Impa had only ever been mentioned in instruction manuals. At the end of Skyward Sword, because of the time travel involved, the Goddess Sword and the Master Sword exist simultaneously. The Master Sword is within the sealed temple, while the Goddess Sword is up in Skyloft. This likely explains its appearance in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, with the latter being having it as a reward for repairing the giant goddess statue in the Forgotten Temple, or as an unlockable after scanning the Skyward Sword Link amiibo. In the opening cutscene of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, the portal opened by Terrako has Sheikah writing around the edges that reads Gate of Time Open. In the Wind Waker, there is an Easter egg that may occur if Link attempts to use the grappling hook crane near but not directly on top of a ring of light or a barrel. He will pull up a barnacle covered pot and no musical fanfare will play. After discarding the pot, an ocean octorock will spawn nearby. These faces are most likely a reference to traditional Japanese octopus pots or hako subo, which are used to fish for octopus in Japan and the Mediterranean Sea. The idea of Link transforming into a wolf actually came from a dream by the game's director, Alji Aonuma. You see, during a work trip, Aonuma dreamt he was a wolf trapped inside a jail, similar to the scene where Link meets Midna as a wolf. The title screen of A Link to the Past on the GBA has been slightly altered in multiple ways, such as the Master Sword now being blue in color as opposed to purple in the original game. The background also takes up more of the screen, and a press start prompt now appears under the game's name. The Windfish's speech to Link at the end of Link's Awakening is referenced by Gulliver in Animal Crossing New Horizons after awakening him from his slumber. More specifically, he quotes, "But verily, it is the nature of dreams to end." Series producer Alji Aonuma wanted to add a motorcycle to Breath of the Wild, as playing the game's massive world on a horse reminded him of the first time he rode a motorcycle. However, the idea was originally rejected by the staff, as they thought it would break the game. When looking for a reward after completing the Champion's Ballad DLC, Aonuma insisted again, finally getting the idea approved, with the programmers even buying a motocross bike in order to understand how it worked. In Breath of the Wild, due to an image of a sun shroom which automatically registers it to the Hyrule Compendium being required as part of the sun shroom sensing side quest to be able to purchase compendium entries from Simon, the sun shroom is the only entry that cannot be purchased, as Link will already have it. The default image still exists in the game's files, however. Moblins were actually going to appear in Twilight Princess, and they were even featured in a trailer. However, for some reason they were cut from the final game. Even though only 3 Lynels appear in A Link to the Past, 5 of them appear in the ending of the Game Boy Advance version after completing the Palace of the Four Swords. Directly underneath most stables in Tears of the Kingdom, on the surface, are armored Lynels in the depths, except for Tabantha Bridge stable for some reason. Epona went through a bit of a change during Ocarina of Time's development. You see, initially Link would hit Epona with with a whip when he wanted her to go faster. After hitting her, he was supposed to give her a carrot as a reward. Thus, the character stamina meter system was born. The whip, however, was left out of the official release, and instead Link smacks Epona's side. Dark Nuts in the Menace Cap generally carry their shields with their left hands, but their shield hand changes when they face east. This is because the Dark Nuts sprite is being horizontally flipped, mirroring the graphic. This may be so Link can constantly attack Dark Nuts from the top instead of having to alternate between top and bottom every time they turn left or right. During development for Breath of the Wild, the developers took special care in designing the behavior of horses for the game, specifically enabling them to dodge trees in their path. This is because real-world horses don't run into trees very often. In the United Kingdom and Ireland instruction booklet for Phantom Hourglass, Beetle is mistakenly called Terry, his name in most of the game's localizations. Even though goddess statues technically first appeared in Skyward Sword first, you can actually argue from an in-universe perspective, the trophy item from The Adventure of Link may actually be a goddess statue, even if its significance may have been forgotten over time. In the international versions of the game, the trophy even has the same pose, while in the original Japanese version, the item is named the Megami Zol, like all confirmed goddess statues. During development of Skyward Sword, a remote boomerang was planned to be included. With it, Link would have been able to drop anywhere after grabbing it and controlling its trajectory. The idea was later abandoned as it might have led to the skipping of important items and areas, however. The idea eventually evolved into the creation of the Beetle item. At another point during development of Skyward Sword, a rocket punch was proposed for grabbing items. This idea as well led to the creation of the Beetle item. In Twilight Princess, if Link is already at full health, the fairies will either completely ignore him, or if he remains motionless long enough, will fly in close and land on his hat or sword if drawn out. This works in his wolf form along with his regular form. In a Q&A page in 1998, Dan Olsen of Nintendo confirmed that sword beams were actually present in Ocarina of Time, though they were inexplicably removed before release. The code for the sword beam can still be found in the game's debug ROM, however, so it's possible to hack it back into the game. The fire gloves from Triforce Heroes make the same sound that Fire Mario does while casting fireballs with the fire flower in the Mario series. The dongo's name could be derived from the word dodong, the Japanese onomatopoeia for the sound of an explosion. The dongo was also previously used as the name of a kaiju in the original 1966 Ultraman series. During a talk at the Computer Entertainment Development Conference, the director and engineer of Tears of the Kingdom revealed that during the development of the game, Nintendo created their own social media platform for communication and development. You see, the basic production flow of the project was as follows: drawing board, implementation, playtest after reaching a milestone, data collection, and analysis. The team would go through this repeated cycle following the last steps completion. The last three steps, which needed to be smoother and more efficient, is where the Rupee bulletin board came in for the game. Developers were able to share feedback from playtests in real time. Developers could also give rupees to posts they agreed with. The forum was monitored in a way that only opinions based on concrete information were allowed and not personal impressions. Arguments were also forbidden. Instead, feedback was dished out through rupees.